Imagine for a moment if after 9/11, the entire media establishment, the country, Democrats, many nations in the world rallied around al-Qaeda. That somehow al-Qaeda had a point that day. And al-Qaeda, as we, America, counterattacks, well, we must be very, very, very careful not to hurt al-Qaeda too much. That's what's happening right now with Israel and Hamas. Hamas, horrible, evil, ugly terrorists. Yet, everybody seems to be bending over backwards for them, worried about them. They're the ones who took the hostages. And something bad did happen. Hostages were killed by Israeli troops. One of the many things about war that so many don't understand. War is messy. War is ugly. Horrible things happen in war. That's why it's to be avoided unless it's absolutely necessary. And Israel has no choice right now. None. Zero. They must, for survival, eradicate Hamas. Period. Things do happen, though, in war. We have to put them in perspective.
The IDF announced that 3 of them were mistakenly killed by Israeli troops, even though one was carrying a stick with a white cloth on it.
The killing of those 3 hostages was a terrible error and a tremendous tragedy.
It was a mistake. It was a tragedy. But Israel is now almost getting more blame for this mistake rather than the deliberate act of taking civilian hostages. This is Richard Haas, an alleged smart guy, total establishment. Listen to him. Never served a day in the military. These guys, these foreign policy establishment types, they have no concept of what it means to actually be in the military. And yeah, the horrible things that sometimes happen.
The breakdown of discipline in the IDF, there was already going to be a massive investigation about Israeli intelligence and defense preparedness or lack of it. There's now obviously going to need to be an investigation here. How did discipline break down?
He's been more aggressive in calling for an investigation into Israel than he has in calling for the eradication of Hamas. So many people just like that. He may look vaguely familiar. Remember when Joe Biden was on stage saying, well, bragging that he had that prosecutor fired? Remember this?
I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting $1 billion. I said, you're not getting $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired.
And one of the guys laughing is the guy on the right there, Richard Haas, who runs the Council on Foreign Relations, who was just telling us about how undisciplined Israel is. No, the Israeli Defense Forces, probably one of the best militaries in human history. And it is awful that 3 hostages were killed. But remember who took the hostages to begin with: Hamas. Who does this other than savages, other than evil terrorists, taking civilians, women and children sometimes, as hostage? I mean, again, somehow Hamas is seen as a protected, oppressed group, and we can't criticize them for anything? Are you crazy? What kind of crazy world is this? I am very eager to see a movie about what really happened there. You know, the Hamas terrorists were weird enough to wear body cams as they went into battle. This is all body camera footage worn by the terrorists. Well, they got a lot of footage of them incriminating themselves, committing war crimes. And there is a movie out there that only select audiences can see. It's called Bearing Witness to the October 7th Massacre. And in that movie, well, what is there? Let's go to some video of the Hamas attack. Hamas members shot dead civilians in their living rooms, lit houses on fire, and hurled a grenade at a father trying to protect his children. Next, please. The footage includes photographs of 2 babies that had been shot in the head and 2 infants who appear to have been burnt to a char. But, yeah, let's make Bibi Netanyahu. He's the issue. Just ask Chris Coons. This is the man who now occupies, I believe, Joe Biden's seat in the U.S. Senate.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has been an exceptionally difficult partner. What has been a real challenge is the big gap between most of us in Congress and the president, who believe a 2-state solution is the only way forward, and Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has done everything he can to undermine a positive vision for peace for Israel.
How about that? In his hour of need, Bibi getting slammed by this guy in his cushy life in some studio in Delaware or Washington, D.C. Chris Coons, you may remember him, by the way. Joe Biden. Joe Biden was very weirdly close to his daughter when he was getting sworn in. Chris Coons had no problem with that or didn't notice it. Bibi Netanyahu is a hero. Absolutely. Saving hostages, crisis, it's in his blood. He knows what he's doing. It's amazing what Chris Coons said out loud, because that was definitely authorized by the administration, right? They want this word out about Bibi. We have lied and covered up for so many maniacs across the world. The United States have, especially Democrats. This is President Ghani, the guy who ran away from Afghanistan. He was such an incredible leader, according to our officials in Washington, right up until the day he quit, until he ran away. How about President Xi? Can you imagine Chris Coons or any Democrat, any Biden administration officials slamming President Xi the way Chris Coons just slammed Bibi Netanyahu? Why is this happening? Why? Why are we doing it? Because of these women and what they represent. These awful squad members and their hideous anti-Semitism and concerns, parochial concerns about the 2024 election. And Joe Biden getting very, very desperate. And he knows he's losing votes, especially among these young radicals who used to tolerate him, at least for a moment. All right, next. Joe Biden and Jim Biden getting very, very close. That is Jim Biden on the right with Joe Biden. Jim is a couple of years younger than Joe, I believe. And they have been seen in public together, but not much. Not much. They keep their distance. Not many photos of these guys actually publicly available. And this might be one of the reasons.
I remember looking at Jim Biden and saying, how are you guys getting away with this? Like, aren't you concerned? And he looked at me and he laughed a little bit and said, plausible deniability. With me asking out of concern, how are you guys doing this? Aren't you concerned that you're going to put your brother's, future presidential campaign at risk? The Chinese, the stuff that you guys have been doing already in 2015 and 2016 around the world. And I just can almost picture his face where he sort of chuckles and says, plausible deniability.
So somehow they arranged it so they could deny that Jim Biden was getting money from all over the world, all over America, people who wanted to do business with Joe Biden, but they would set it up that they could never actually trace it to Joe Biden. That's what plausible deniability means in this context. Washington Post, interestingly enough, did a big story about, Jim Biden's deal-making caught on FBI tapes in an unrelated bribery probe. When the Washington Post starts doing stories like this that they should have been doing in 2020, it's interesting. It suggests that the establishment is getting ready to give Joe Biden the heave-ho. This is an interesting story. It's not a smoking gun. They want a smoking gun, but this is circumstantial, and it's bad. Let me go through it. Kudos to the Washington Post, although they do it very gently, almost politely. Richard Dickey Scruggs, a famed Mississippi trial attorney, was tantalizingly close to a historic deal to force tobacco companies to pay billions of dollars. But there was one last hurdle. A divided Congress had to sign off. And Scruggs had identified one of the most skeptical senators, Joe Biden, as a key to winning the vote. Scruggs turned to Biden's younger brother, James, an old acquaintance who ran a D.C. consulting firm with his wife, Sarah. Scruggs paid the firm $100,000 in 1998 for advice on passing the bill. Scruggs said in an interview at his office here that the first time he disclosed the amount, it is the first time he disclosed the amount, and I probably would not have hired him if he wasn't the senator's brother. Biden eventually backed the bill, which ultimately failed to pass Congress. Jim was never untoward about his influence. He didn't brag about it or talk about it. He didn't have to. He was the man's brother. Interesting, right? Here's Jim Biden talking on audio to these folks in Mississippi about, how much he wants to make money, but sounds a little embarrassed by it, actually.
My hesitancy to be a to be an opportunist. And
Yeah,
because
sure.
everybody is jumping on him.
Right.
Okay? There's nothing wrong with opportunists. Sarah just rolled her eyes at me. So, but to being a whore about it, okay?
Yeah.
Everybody's just jumping in, like, let me do your insurance, let me do your legal.
He doesn't want to be an opportunist. He doesn't want to be a whore. W-H-O-R-E. Why is he so reluctant to do that? Joe, I've seen Joe. He wants to do that. He said when we first met him what he's eager to do and be.
The fortunate thing is I didn't have many larger contributors, and the only reason, I went to the big guys for the money. I was ready to prostitute myself in the manner in which I talk about it.
All right, you see, the Bidens are okay. They're all about money. So back to Jim Biden. This is some fellow in the South who later, I believe, went to jail. These guys in the article, a lot of them went to jail for bribing this official or that official, but at this time, they want to do business with the Bidens and listen to how it's all going to be set up.
And I told him that we had formalized our relationship with you guys, told him about the real Washington presence, that this was not going to be, a bullshit, shingle hung somewhere in a window, that this was a real deal, that Sarah was coming on, as a named partner, equity share in the venture, that we were changing the name of the firm to include her. Told her that, Hunter was going to be involved and you were going to be involved.
Wow, everybody, Jim Biden, Hunter Biden, Sarah Biden are going to be involved in this venture, whatever the heck it is, Mississippi and Delaware. What do they have to do with each other, by the way, huh? A U.S. senator and his brother and his wife and the son doing all this business with Mississippi. I don't know, politics, huh? I have to go back to this, though. Jim Biden received $100,000 in 1998 from a guy who hired him to change his brother's mind about a great big piece of legislation, and it worked. He changed his mind. Now, that $100,000, do you think it all went to Jim? Everything we know now. How about this check? We know that James Biden in 2018 wrote his brother a check for $200,000. I know it says loan repayment, but does anybody buy that this is a loan repayment? That is from James Biden to Joe Biden for $200,000. I think the $100,000 and the $200,000 is a big clue as to how Joe got so rich. Joe has stuff all over the place, right? The vacation home, this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, fancy cars, watches, you name it, Joe has got it. And he didn't just get it as an ex-vice president. And you can make some money, decent money when you're an ex-vice president. He made it as a first-term U.S. senator in Delaware. He's like 33 years old when he buys the largest house in the state. Everybody knows that Delaware and the DuPont Chemical, right? They go together. Well, this is one of the DuPont homes, and Joe buys it, and Joe's proud of it. And if you look at this fake news book that they love so much in the fake news, What It Takes, came out, 30 years ago. They call it the political Bible. They covered the 1988 campaign. Joe was a candidate for president back then. And Joe has a big mouth. And he talks to these reporters a lot. And he talks to them about that fancy DuPont mansion.
It's the kind of place 1,000 Italian guys died building. Hand-carved doorways, a curving hand-carved grand staircase that Clark Gable could have carried a girl down. A library fit for a Carnegie or Bernard Baruch, someone like that. And a ballroom. Can't forget the ballroom. And a living room, about half an acre. And a bathroom upstairs the size of a gym, and all dusty rows outside with beautiful brickwork over the windows, black shutters, white porches, a fountain, a pool. The place is drop-dead stately.
Okay, the print is going like this for some reason. That's okay. Can I see that drop-dead stately place that 1,000 Italian guys created? That's amazing, right? That's a huge house for a first-term United States senator, not making much money officially. You know, the ballroom thing, Hunter's first wife, Kathleen, you know what happened, right? Hunter started hooking up with Haley, and then, anyway, they're divorced now. But Kathleen wrote a memoir, a very thoughtful memoir, came out about a year or so ago. She talked about the opulence of the Biden family back in the 1990s. Hunter tried to tell me that he came from a middle-class family, but nothing about his life looked remotely middle-class to me. Months later, when I went to his house for the first time, again, all the way back in the 1990s, I explained to him that the middle-class families I knew did not live like this, let alone working-class families like mine. Hunt, I told him, a kid from a middle-class family does not have a ballroom. But somehow Joe had that mansion and a lot of other things. And at the same time, when he had all this stuff, he's running around telling everybody how poor he is.
I was listed for all the years I was a senator as the poorest man in the United States Congress. I had the dubious distinction of being listed as the poorest man in Congress for 36 years. I had the great pleasure of being listed as the poorest man in Congress for 36 years.
Let me see how the poorest man in Congress lives. If this is the poorest man in Congress's house, how does the richest guy live, huh? I mean, all right, here's the issue with Joe. I told you, he stopped growing 50 years ago when he made it big as a United States Senator in 1973. 50 years ago. And what was going on 50 years ago? It's before Watergate. Politicians were helping themselves to a lot of stuff. Richard Nixon was president. Spiro Agnew was his vice president. Actually, Spiro Agnew was doing what a lot of politicians did back then, steal. He was taking money as governor of Maryland, just wide open in plain sight, even as vice president, just taking cash. It was done back then. He got caught because, well, they were trying to get Nixon, and he stood in the way.
Good evening. Vice President Agnew's resignation came under the intense pressure of a federal investigation of political graft, and it was coupled with Agnew's admission that he had cheated on his income taxes, which brought him a $10,000 fine and probation for 3 years.
Wow, the federal government investigating a vice president and a president. They were Republicans. They were a Republican vice president. Anyway, he was guilty. He was taking this stuff wide out, right in the open. The word around D.C. was he just got sloppy. He should have been more discreet. You got to remember, what did Jim Biden call it? Plausible deniability. Spiro Agnew, rest in peace.